Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible turnaround stories in history. It's about a penniless orphan, someone who was rejected and persecuted, who somehow managed to build an entire civilization. It's a journey from total despair to worldwide influence, all against what really seemed like impossible odds. So let's get into it. So this is really the big question we're tackling. I mean, think about it. How does someone go from being completely alone, with everyone against them, to building something that lasts for centuries? It's a story about resilience, for sure, but also about strategy and an incredible amount of faith. Let's see how it happened. All right, so this story starts in Makkah, and it begins with intense struggle. From the very beginning, his life was marked by poverty and just grueling work. This was not a privileged upbringing by any stretch of the imagination. It was a life defined by hardship right from the get-go. And these are his own words. Just take a second to picture that. It's not some grand, heroic statement. It's the simple, honest truth of a young man working for, just a few coins, trying to help the uncle who'd taken him in. This really grounds the whole story in a very real, very tangible struggle. Of course, nobody gets through that kind of hardship alone. And he had two crucial pillars of support. On one side, you have Abu Talib, his uncle. Now, in the harsh tribal world of Makkah, his protection was literally a shield. He was the clan chief, and that shield kept his enemies at bay. And on the other side, his wife, Khadija. She was his emotional and financial bedrock. I mean, she was the very first person to believe in him, and that kind of support is just priceless. Well, as his message started to get out there, the opposition didn't just grow, it got organized, and it got brutal. This kicked off one of the absolute darkest times for the early community, a period of total isolation and unimaginable suffering. And look, this wasn't just some disagreement. We're talking about a full-on siege. The most powerful clans in the city banded together and completely cut off his entire family, the Banu Hashim. No trade, no marriage, no contact. The whole idea was to literally starve them into giving up. The conditions were just horrific. The whole clan was pushed into this narrow, barren valley. The historical accounts talk about the constant, haunting sound of children crying from hunger. Food became so scarce that people were actually boiling and eating dry leather just to have something in their stomachs. And this went on for 3 long years. And just when you think it can't possibly get any worse, it does. Right after the boycott finally ends, both of his pillars of support die in the very same year. His tribal shield, Abu Talib, was gone, and his steadfast ally, Khadija, was gone. This time is known as the Year of Sorrow, and it was, without a doubt, the lowest point of his life in Makkah. He was now totally and completely vulnerable. So, with his protection in Makkah completely gone, he had to look elsewhere for support. He set out on a journey to the nearby city of Taif, hoping, praying that he'd find some new allies. Instead, what he found was the most painful, most humiliating rejection of his entire life. What happened next was just awful. He gets there hoping for an alliance. He sits down with the city's leaders, and they don't just say no, they mock him. One of them actually sneered, "Couldn't God find anyone better to send than you?" And then they took it even further. They actually incited a mob of street kids to chase him out of the city. The cruelty of that day is just staggering. The mob threw stones at him, aiming for his legs and feet, until his shoes were filled with his own blood. This was the absolute bottom, a moment of complete physical and emotional agony. And in that moment of total despair, after he'd found shelter in a garden outside the city, he turned to God. But listen to this prayer. It's not a prayer of anger or revenge. It's just profound human vulnerability. He lays it all bare. His weakness, his lack of options, his humiliation. It's such a raw, powerful moment of turning to faith when every single worldly door has been slammed in your face. But here's the thing. That moment of deepest despair, it was also the turning point, because out of the ashes of that horrible experience in Taif, a new hope started to rise from a totally unexpected place, and it would lead to a complete reversal of his fortunes. This right here captures that dramatic shift perfectly. You can really split the whole story into these two phases. The Makkah period, it was all about persecution, isolation, sorrow, and just holding on with passive patience. But the Medina period? That was about to become a story of welcome, unity, hope, and decisive strategic action. So, how did this massive change happen? Well, it wasn't a fluke, it was a slow, careful development. It started with just 6 pilgrims from a city called Yathrib. The next year, a dozen people came. The year after that, 75 people showed up, and they didn't just accept the message, they formally invited him and his entire community to their city, offering them full protection. So this wasn't an escape. It was a planned strategic migration, the Hijra, to a new and welcoming home base. So, when he arrived in Yathrib, which would soon be renamed Medina, his role completely transformed. He wasn't just a preacher running from persecution anymore. All of a sudden, he was the leader of a brand new, diverse community, and it was his job to build a society from the ground up. And his first actions in those first 6 months were just foundational for building this new society. First, he builds a mosque, but it's not just for prayer. It's a community center, a school, a place of government. Second, he creates this incredible brotherhood pact, pairing local families with the penniless immigrants to make sure everyone was taken care of. And finally, and this was truly revolutionary, he drafted the Covenant of Medina. Think of it as a constitution that brought together all the city's different tribes, Muslims, Jews, and others, into a single community, all bound by mutual defense. Now, with a secure home base and a united community behind him, the whole strategy could evolve. That long, painful period of passive patience was over. Now, a period of active resistance began. This meant strategically challenging the economic lifelines of their old persecutors in Makkah, those very trade caravans that were the source of all their power. It was a way of showing that a new power had emerged, one that they couldn't just ignore or crush anymore. So you have to ask, what was the engine behind this whole incredible journey? What drove him from rock bottom to being a nation builder? Through all of it, the poverty, the boycotts, the stoning at Taif, the sources always point back to one constant, underlying source of strength. And that source was dua, or supplication. It's described as something much more than a ritual. Think of it as a direct conversation with God. It was seen as a shield for protection, a weapon against hardship, and a source of deep inner peace that kept him and his followers going through the absolute darkest of times.